Thank you for auditing the always positive new music review show hosted by a French professor who every Thursday invites you to the electric Thunderground Thursday, where I review perhaps lesser known music. In this case, I'm reviewing the album Astro Tough by Audiobooks, a band which I was drawn to primarily just because I love the name. In a way, their name represents their music quite well, because an audiobook itself is a bizarre idea, right? It's kind of like it makes sense when you hear it, but it's also a jarring modern creation, an audiobook. And I think a lot of what this music is a lot of jarring musical creations, right? Kind of very modern musical creations. These are the two people in the band. We have the Johnny Winter looking dude there, David Wrench, who does most of the music, I believe all the music, and then Evangeline Ling, who writes all the words and does all the singing. Now, I was initially a little bit skeptical of the band because apparently she's a model, and so, if you have like a super producer and a model, I thought there might be some kind of Pygmalion, sort of Karen Elson, Brigitte Bardot situation happening here, but fortunately that's not at all the case. Whether or not she had a previous career, this is an artist and a singer who happens to model and not the other way around. If you look up about this band, a lot of times what you see is synth-pop. And when you listen to this whole album especially, it makes you realize how weak of a term synth-pop even is. I mean, it encompasses so much. I mean, this album itself is very synth, but it's also very pop. Sometimes it's straight pop, sometimes it's even hyper pop, sometimes it's minimalist, sometimes it's maximalist, sometimes it's kind of dub. A lot of times it's just kind of like house music, even kind of trancey music. I think the thing that unifies it all together is that it's all kind of a party. It's kind of a weird, overly introspective party, filled with sad reflections on life, but kind of catchy and light at the same time. I think Evangeline Ling is a particularly interesting lyricist because the way she presents herself, and it's matched well with the way the music is produced as well, is that this could be a case where it would just be drenched in kind of postmodern irony. A lot of the things that she sings about seems like she could be taking an ironic stance, but for the most part, it's an album filled with sincere observations. There are two primary themes which dominate this album. One is the tyranny of mediocre men. I already discussed that in my Lucy Dacus review, where that album is dedicated to that as well. But it's important to emphasize, mediocre men are a problem, not because it's too bad that people are boring or manipulative or controlling or abusive. The problem is the power that men have in society. And that's in the big society and in just in a daily interaction. So that kind of imbalance of power makes mediocre men tyrannical. And beyond that, I would say it's also an introspection of the nature of a good time. Like, what is it to have a good time? Is it important to have a good time? Do we like having good times? What is a good night out? It's kind of a party that's always asking about whether or not we should be partying. Kind of a disillusionment with fun. And associated with that, I would say there's also disillusionment with fame, especially the modern concept of fame. In my very brief research, I found an article from 2014 with Evangeline Ling and her brother and her sister. And it's like this whole piece by the Evening Standard. I think it's a British newspaper. They're British, by the way, from England. And it was just this really obnoxious article about how they're all influencers and bloggers and these sort of catchphrases and catchwords of just sort of 21st century banal fame. I think a lot of this album is her coming to terms with that, about the emptiness of that kind of fame. And I think seeing as she's lived it, right? Seeing as she's lived her whole life, assumedly, or most of her life, at least since she was 14, according to that article, in this sort of state of apparent fame, of semi-fame, and also of just receiving a lot of attention from not just mediocre men, but mediocre people in general. But let me give you a taste of this album. Every album, I give you one song that I think is a good example of what the album is like, and for that, I'm going to pick the first track off the album, The Doll. I'll include a link to it up there. Feel free to leave, listen to it, fall in love with it, listen to the rest of the album, never come back to this video, okay? Thunderground Thursday is my chance to just sort of curate something, hopefully. And if you like my other videos, you might like this music. So if you don't even come back to hear me talk about it, that's fine. I just want to share this good art that's being made. So how is this song typical of this band of audiobooks? Well, I mean, both lyrically and musically, it's kind of dark, it's smart, it's mysterious, it's danceable, it's fun, it's a little sad, it's catchy, and I'm gonna say mysterious again, right? Musically, it's like this house song that just, like gets you going immediately. This four on the floor, and this like bass synthesizer with some percussion, percussive elements added, do 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 do, and then eventually from the back, this kind of dirty synth lead comes in, and it comes in and out throughout the song. The whole song builds up to a crescendo at the end where there's just all sorts of different layers, and the synthesizer line comes in, and sometimes the drums go out, the drums come back in, but it has like the feeling like, like you want to be at a club dancing and partying and like listening to this awesome house music, But then we get into the lyrics, okay? And this is what I'm talking about, sort of dark, fun, and sad at the same time. The lyrics are fairly straightforward. They're delivered mostly in spoken word with a very thick, I assume, London accent. I don't know. I think they're from London. It's all about about this woman who's walking, and then a little girl comes up and says that she's lost her doll, and would she call 911? And then the police don't do anything, so they just go out looking for the doll, and they never find it in the middle of the night. And that's kind of like an interesting, fun, sad story. But what I like about this song is the ambiguity that's built into it. Like she's a very good poet in terms of like a story that she's capable of writing. And this song, it's really never quite clear. Like, is there really a girl? Is there a chance that this girl represents the woman, represents the singer? What is the story with this lost doll? At one point, she makes it very personal. Evangeline Ling makes it very personal. When she talks about like how she'd just been at a Thai restaurant and she was comfort eating. And so it becomes clear that like this doll represents something, and its loss represents something, but it's never right on the nose. It's never exactly clear what it is. Is it a lost lover? Is it a dead loved one? Is it a sense of self? We don't quite know. And the lack of answer, I think, is what makes this end part so strong, where all these other elements come in, this like great kind of just club banger, a sad club banger that just talks about how it's so hard to let go. And it's just sung over and over again. So this doll is everything we can't let go of. Then the one thing that initially bothered me, but I think makes it quite interesting, is at one point she says, it's so hard to let go of you. So who is you? Who is the doll? There is not one answer. There's a lot of different answers. And I think she shows this ability to really paint a picture. An audiobook, if you will, right? This is like a story, right? And we're engaged and we're imagining ourselves walking around the streets of Coventry. I guess that's a part of London. My knowledge of geography, British geography, is not great. I guess it's a part of London. Just the idea of like walking around in the rain and trying to find this doll and being with the girl, and the sort of compassion and sort of weird distance, because at first she isn't going to help her, and then she is. She decides she's going to help her because the doll's her only friend in the world. And then it's suggested that she just go out and buy another one. So it's another question of like money and commerce and objects, and what does it all mean? And what does it all mean? And what does it all mean? And we don't really know what it all means, but it doesn't really matter, because you're just kind of sitting there and you're dancing, right? I love electronic dance music, or I love music that is electronic that I can dance to, and especially when it has this level of density to it, I really appreciate it. The next song is, I think, one of the main singles off the album, and is my least favorite song on the album. La La La, It's the Good Life. This feels more to me like an idea than like a good song. It's not terrible, but a lot of it is this other theme of the album, of the nature of good life and partying. If people are killing the vibes, we'll order an Uber XL, sort of a very kind of modern statement about the nature of parties and of feeling like a FOMO, fear of missing out, and kind of disillusionment with fun. But musically, it's sort of like 100 gecs. I thought it was 100 gecs for the NPR set, right? So it does the thing that 100 gecs does of taking auto-tune and making it very aggressive and very abstract and very in your face. I listened to it while I drove my daughter to school today. She had a meeting of the government. She's part of student government, and just proud of her. And and like she was like, it feels like she's yelling at you. And I think it's part of the song. It's part of the theme of the song. You know, it takes its place with Alors on danse by Stromae and How Soon Is Now by the Smiths, of just sort of like songs about going out where you just feel like going out is just terrible. And I think it fits the theme, but just musically it's not quite as enjoyable as the rest. Fortunately, the next song, The English Manipulator, is the first song mostly dedicated to these men, these just terrible, boring, mediocre men. Musically, it's one of my favorite songs. It hits very hard at the start, kind of dub sounding, a little bit of reverb. Reminds me even a little bit of Ace of Base, which is a pop band that I really liked from the 90s. Turns out, by the way, they're popular in America, but not in Sweden. I have Swedish friends who say, yeah, we never got Ace of Base. But just speaking of bass, very strong bass. And this is a song, you know, the third song on the album. It's not really a song for dancing. It's a song for head nodding, you know? And then here the concept of Englishness really, really comes in, right? Because it's this question of this Englishman, right? Of this English manipulator. And the way that she describes him is so amazing. Like, I don't know, right? I'm not, you know, plenty of men have tried to pick me up, but not as a young woman, right? And it's sort of like the way that she describes this person who's trying to pick her up. Rude and well-mannered. What a great dissection, right? Like, because the concept and the stereotypes and image that we have of an English gentleman, rude and well-mannered. Like the rudeness that comes from entitlement, from the feeling that you are the king of the world, which has been reinforced by society itself, but also just rude, you know, just rude and well-mannered all together. A beautiful image and a good example, again, of what makes Evangeline Ling, not Lily, she didn't star on Lost, is what makes her such a great lyricist. It's cool, it kind of like, she says stop, and then it comes in with this chorus, like never say hi again. I assume this is like just not wanting unwanted advances, you know. I've known enough women in my life to know that it can be very difficult, because if you say hello to somebody, all of a sudden people are all over you. And what I really like about this is she talks about a couple different signs that you're dealing with this kind of English manipulator, right? And the first one is offering whiskey instead of wine. Then the second one is they don't know the difference between Manet and Monet. And just because I feel like it, just because I'm in my office, I have to keep quiet so I don't bother my colleagues next door, you know. I'm just going to show you the slides when I explain the difference between Manet and Monet in my French civilization class. So just take a break. Skip ahead a couple minutes if you don't want to learn anything about art history. This is Cabanel's Birth of Venus from 1863, and this was what was considered to be good art at the time. That was official Academy art, okay? You see it's very kind of classical, has soft images, a sort of idealized perfection. It was liked so much by Napoleon III, the Emperor of France, that he actually bought the painting, and he owned the painting for a long time. The same time this was happening, Manet is in here, and he was rejected at the official salon, so he had the Salon of the Refused, the Salon des Refusés, and there he had the famous Déjeuner sur l'herbe. So, you know, when I teach this, I talk about what makes him such an interesting artist, that one of his great artist statements is, I paint what I want. I paint what I see, not what other people want me to see. All right, what is it? Oh, I paint what I see, not what it would please others to see. Right, so this concept of sort of a real view, but also a personal vision, you know, and he very much brought in this personal vision and like little like paint marks everywhere, because you're starting to see a lot of brush marks everywhere. And this definitely led into what Monet would be. But it is very important that, much like this English manipulator, you understand that Manet is not Monet. The metaphor I came up with for my students is it's the same way that Harry Potter is not Harry Styles. They have names that are kind of similar, and they're both British and pale and handsome, but they're not the same person, you know? 1863 versus 1872, you can see Monet there, very different style. And I think it's an interesting idea, because what she's showing is, and this happens a lot, where mediocre men hit on women and try to pick them up and try to do what they can to impress them. but he can't even impress her because she's a real artist, right? She's very intelligent, knows what she's doing. So she's sitting there and he's trying to essentially mansplain to her, but mansplain to her incorrectly. If you have any fun stories about people incorrectly mansplaining, please put them in the comments. I've heard a lot of very good ones and very sad ones. So I'm just going on that little tangent to also say this is part of what makes this album nice, is it's a very kind of heady album. I think if you're an art history major or if you're into art, you're going to like this album because it feels like it's made with a real artistic sentiment. Next song is not based on Monet or Manet. He Called Me Bambi. A little more guitar based here. So one thing that I guess this guy, David Wrench, has done a lot of producing for a lot of different bands. I don't particularly know him, but he's very capable, lots of different kinds of styles. So this one has this very solid guitar line. Eventually we have real drums, not drum machines. These kind of tinkling sounds in the back, has kind of a gentle Western feel, almost laughing synthesizers in the background. And this, I think, is very much connected to the previous song, this English manipulator, because here it's someone calling her Bambi, calling her someone kind of weak and frail, kind of a silly name for a woman. And it's a call for humanity, a call for her humanity in the front of this person. I've got feelings too, is one of the things that she says, At the end, it gets very poetic and bizarre. She talks about like her dog being sick and then this person saying that he's sorry and then what the vegetarians think they know. And by the end, she's so upset and so frustrated with this person that you actually hear her spitting, presumably at this person. The next song is called Blue, Tits. I don't know if I can say that word or not on YouTube without saying that this is not for children or something. Just so you know, a European blue tit is that bird. That's, if you look up blue tits on the internet, I'm just gonna say it, that bird pops up. And that's one of the most charming and wholesome things that you could ever imagine, right? Like seriously, look up on Google right now, blue tits, and you'll see this beautiful European bird. But this isn't about that. This is about women's anatomy, and more specifically, it's about the tyranny, again, of mediocre men, but in particular, the tyranny of the male gaze, of men looking at women and reducing everything. And it's very kind of simplistic musically, these two chords on a synthesizer, but just talking, so she's talking in the first person, I imagine in the guise of a sort of sex-obsessed man, saying, I look at the clouds and I see tits, and I'm at the beach and I see tits, and I look at the ocean, I see blue tits. It's kind of funny, and then this kind of chorus, sex, 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 all you think about sex. Feels almost stream of consciousness. Almost reminds me sort of like a Tonight's the Night, just sort of like extended out feeling with her kind of riffing on this theme. But again, there's a kind of call to humanity. I want you to be real. That's the thing that she says. So we kind of have, I have feelings too, I want you to be real. This whole time, like I'm talking about this album, it's very catchy, right? Like all this music is very catchy, it's very fun, it's very light, right? Even though a lot of these themes are deep. But there's like this great mixture between that kind of lightness and then the heaviness of these lines. And even though it seems like it's a song like, oh, dudes just see boobs, it's not really actually about that. It's about the block to real intimacy or to real communication that's there. I'm done with the cute slides. I'm just going to put a couple images of Evangeline Ling's artwork in the back there. Next song is called First Move. More of like a straightforward pop song here, like multiple chords and parts. It feels less like a dance track. And this is cool because, the last couple of songs we've been talking about these men who are sort of objectifying and manipulating. But here we have sort of mutual empathy. It seems to be a song about like a woman who's out dancing or out at night, and then a divorced man, and like they want to get together, but like they can't quite make the first move, and the man is afraid of being seen as a predator, and the woman wants to be picked up. But in some ways it reminds me of that great Smith song Girl Afraid, which you sort of have both sides of a sort of failed love affair, and you just sort of feel this tension and the sadness. And we've all been there. We've all been in that place in our life, I think, where we just don't quite know. Musically, one of the coolest things that happens here is she starts like screaming and harmonizing with herself. And it's just a very kind of cool way. I'd say this is basically a consent anthem. I don't know. There should be more of those, right? The next song is called Driven by Beef. That's in the running for my favorite song titles of the year. Now it's hard because so many underground rappers just come out with so many great song titles. But just say "Driven by Beef." Just say it back at home. I'll Dora the Explorer it. Can you say "Driven by Beef"? Good. This song reminds me a little bit of the Waitresses. I read like an interview with them where they said like their main influence, I guess, was the Shags. You know, the sort of outsider music from a trio of sisters from the late 60s. If you've never heard the Shags, it's great. I hear that, but this song has that kind of like, you know, the Waitresses, you know, the, that kind of like, I know what girls like, that weird kind of like poppy, slightly detuned, wild sounding pop music, right? Fun kind of loopy drums. I like the opening line, I want a massage for 500 hours. Things have been kind of tough for me lately. I've had a lot of work to do, a lot of physical ailments. I know what that means. I want a massage for 500 hours. He's kind of like blasting horns, all these like she starts going crazy with singing. There's even some vocoder sounds in the back and layers of synthesizers. Really, this is the most kind of out there song on the album. The voices double and then the drums even double. And then it says, drinks warm milk before she sleeps. That's how it ends. Milk steak. Trouble in Business Class is a very cool song. It's got this kind of like tremolo guitar and acoustic guitar, kind of a flute synthesizer sound. It's another kind of disjointed modern anthem. And it's, again, about another mediocre man. But this case, it's a rich man who smells like Dior Homme. And it seems to me, this is very likely, it's pretty clear, that she's just writing about the feeling of being around rich businessmen, right? Much like the manipulative Englishman, you know, it's like a certain kind of person, a sort of self-described alpha who has a certain air about them and a certain domination and a certain control in society, you know? Like, it's one of my least favorite things in the world, to be eating lunch next to a table of businessmen, because there's always that one guy who talks really loud. Well, yeah, that's what I said for the first quarter, but for the second quarter, she's gonna be ass out. Yeah, just like that kind of thing, where you're sitting there, you're trying to eat your focaccia, and the guy next to you is like talking so loud, it's like he's inside your head. This kind of very male, very domineering personality, it seems to me this is a song just about that, just about having to be in that space with that person, be reminded of that person. Because when you're an artist, when you're an academic, intellectual, it's nice to pretend like the world is not run by those people and that those people don't make all the decisions that ultimately will decide your fate, but they mostly do. What I like here, it's a different kind of reference here. So now we're going to 19th century England, not 19th century France, with Charles Dickens and Oliver Twist. She directly calls him Bill Sikes, the villain of Oliver Twist. And I love this mixture of sort of a modern villain and an older villain, right? Because when you think about the businessman I'm describing, I think you can imagine what they look like, but transposing it to this very loudish, thuggish character from Oliver Twist, I think is very justified, and it's very clever. And just for fun, I'm gonna read you. I'm having fun today. Monet and Manet, I get to talk to. I get to read from Oliver Twist. I'm not super big into Dickens, but still, this is the description of Bill Sikes from Oliver Twist. He had a brown hat on his head and a dirty Belcher handkerchief round his neck, with the long frayed ends of which he smeared the beer from his face as he spoke. He disclosed, when he had done so, a broad, heavy countenance, with a beard of 3 days' growth and 2 scowling eyes, one of which displayed various party-colored symptoms of having been recently damaged by a blow. Right? Just like this, all of a sudden, the dapper Dior Homme, right? This refined person who probably spent a couple $1,000s on their clothing and controls many, many millions, if not billions of dollars in world commerce, becomes this sort of Dickensian figure of the loutish guy who beats his dog. That's his dog Bullseye right there. Who beats his dog, right? Just great. Electric guitar on here. Again, this David Wrench is doing lots of great stuff here. Just like instrumentation, very sparingly used, but when it's used, it's great. It ends kind of quietly, like an actual little bit of like silence, which then leads into Black Lipstick, which is just the most clearly just electronic music. right? Evangeline Ling is barely on this. It's kind of this glitchy, long, entrancey song. It seems to be, again, about preparing for a night of fun. Again, it's this question, like, what is fun? You know, like, what is this fun that we're having, this great la 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 time? It sort of reminds me of Donna Summer meets Bjork, which sounds like awesome. I'm not sure it's as awesome as that sounds, but that's what it made me feel like. At one point she says, I feel like I'm flying, and that kind of like house feeling, you know, like the feeling of house music, like certain parts of certain songs, you hear it and you just get super pumped up, and you just, you know, like when she says, like, I feel like I'm flying, it does that for you. It's sort of like the most kind of techno song. And it's nice because it then leads into the most sort of organic song, Farmer, which is a piano-led song over some Casio drums. Eventually, real drums come in. The piano reminds me a little bit of People Just Ain't No Good by Nick Cave. Maybe it's just because it's on a piano. Eventually, like, some strings come on and some real drums. Like, really definitely the most lush song, the warmest song on here. Although her voice always has a certain metallic quality to it all the way through. And this is sort of about modern anxiety, the search for authenticity, the belief that our great-grandparents understood something that we don't understand. In that way, it reminds me a lot of, 21 Pilots, who sing about that a lot as well. Just about the concept that whatever modern life is, we've lost the plot a little bit. She talks about trying to fit in with her family. She talks about fame and the obsession with fame. Again, I think this image of a person who is featured in a newspaper magazine, 7 years ago for being the it teenager. I think it's pretty reasonable that she would be disillusioned by this fame. And she sort of talks about the past. And she talks about the way things used to be. And keeps talking about a good name. And it's an oddly old-fashioned claim. But listen to this great line. A good name smells better than jasmine. That's just a great line. It's just a great line. It's an album filled with great observations like that, great lines, and these great themes. And it's especially nice if you listen to this album on repeat, because this then leads right into the doll song, and you're back dancing again. It's great. So there's my review. I really enjoy it. I think if you like smart dance music, smart electronic dance music, it's definitely for you. And just, give it a shot. We're in the Thunderground now. Okay, until next time, there's someone right at my office, so maybe they need to talk to me. Student learning outcomes, assessment data, curriculum maps, that's my job. There's the camera.